Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV UK edition. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Time magazine has promised readers just discovering international literary sensation Tana French that her alluring storytelling keeps you hooked, while Vogue has crowned her both a master of psychological complexity and the crime writer for people who think they don't like genre fiction. Her prose is enveloping and intricate, and casually makes its cleverness. She sucks you in with her mystery, then unfurls a masterfully rendered, super specific slice of Irish society, who, according to The New Yorker, inspires cultic devotion in readers and peers alike, with Gillian Flynn declaring that to say Tana French is one of the great thriller writers is really too limiting. Rather, she's simply this, a truly great writer. Thanks in part to her gift, as Salon captured it, for doing something fresh with every novel, each one as powerful as the last, but in a very different manner, before musing that perhaps she has superpowers of her own. Whatever the source of her gift, it's only growing more miraculous with every book. Entertainment Weekly recently remarked on the hallmarks of the award-winning New York Times best-selling author's oeuvre within a Tana French book, featuring the vivid settings, the tightly coiled plot, the rich, haunting atmosphere, all captured in the Dublin Murder Squad series, which kicked off nearly 2 decades ago with In the Woods, which inspired Esquire to declare that every Tana French novel is an event, and it has been since her debut established her astonishing command of the crime genre, specifically the police procedural, whereafter 5 more novels followed in the series, cementing and extending the author's formidable reputation for literary-minded crime, including international bestsellers like The Likeness, Faithful Place, Broken Harbor, The Secret Place, and The Trespasser, which the New York Times congratulated as a tour de force, before powerfully asserting that when you read Miss French, and she has become required reading for anyone who appreciates tough, unflinching intelligence and ingenious plotting. She would next branch out with wild success into the standalone storytelling realm of The Witch Elm, which the Associated Press reasoned was worth 2 readings. The first with the constant tightening of the chest that accompanies all of French's work, the second after the reader can breathe again, which moved the New Republic to conclude that French is at the cutting edge of crime fiction, and this new novel pushes its boundaries further. Tana would next introduce fans via a new series to Cal Hooper, who makes his debut in The Searcher, which the Washington Post went so far as to argue may be her best work yet, and its own kind of masterpiece, while People magazine was impressed with the way she avoids the fireworks of conventional crime fiction, instead taking a classic setup, the lone outsider revealing the dark side of a small town and imbuing it with simmering menace. There's also an unexpectedly moving friendship and storytelling so atmospheric you can practically smell the peat bog. And a more recent hit in the series, The Hunter, which Marie Claire promised readers, has everything you love. The suspense, the questions, the unraveling of lies, obsessively fascinating, while glamour fell instantly for French's writing and style, which they found, like so many, to be unhurried and pleasurable, where every page smells and sounds like Ireland. And she's here today to talk about her amazing journey. Tana, welcome to the show. We're so honored to have you. Growing up in a family where you lived around the world, we understand that books by authors like Agatha Christie and Patricia Highsmith were constant companions. Would you take viewers inside how your own story began? As a lover of storytellers who then became one yourself.
Yeah, definitely. We moved around a lot. We were in the US, in Florence, in Malawi, in Rome. And my mother was great at having a stash of books, right? Because in Malawi, there wasn't an awful lot of access back in the 80s to, you didn't have a huge library or bookshops on every corner. So she'd have this stash and she'd dole them out when she felt you were in need of a new book. And they were absolute treasures. There was no TV. You didn't always live close enough to your friends to go running around the neighborhood. So the books were the moments of magic that you got in that childhood. It was great. Oh, okay. From a mystery standpoint, definitely those are on the list. In particular, Donna Tartt, because she was the person who sort of introduced me to the idea that you can break all the rules of genre. You don't have to be stuck within genre conventions in any way. The Secret History, which is the first one I read, is a great literary novel and it's also a great mystery. And she doesn't seem to have the slightest problem with doing both at once and smashing all the rules. You find out who killed whom on page 1, and yet you're gripped by the story. It's no less sort of driven and gripping and suspenseful because you already know who did what. She doesn't seem fettered by those conventions. She takes them as a really great starting point and sees where she can go from there. And that's huge to somebody who's starting to think in terms of writing. The idea that these are all starting points, these are all jumping off points and inspirations rather than finishing points. She was amazing, definitely, as somebody to read as a writer starting out. I think on a non-mystery standpoint, when it comes to just writing, there were a lot of non-mystery authors that I really fell for. There were people like kind of the moment when I first discovered the power of language would have been when I was about 6. And my dad was reading me The Wind in the Willows. And there's a sentence there that I'm going to misquote. I know I am slightly, but I still remember him saying, never in his life had he seen a river before, that sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal. I mean, that's a gorgeous sentence still now. And it was the first time I had really realized how much power language has, how you can do things with it that aren't obvious and straightforward. You can create an atmosphere and an image with it. So that was probably some kind of moment that I can trace a line from direct to where I am now in terms of just writing and loving beautiful sentences.
How early do you remember first dreaming of becoming a published writer, say a doctor or a lawyer or an astronaut?
I was writing odd little short stories under the bedclothes with a torch when I was like 7. That was what I was going to be when I grew up, when I was that little. Like my first plan was archaeology, right? I was going to be an archaeologist and discover Troy when I was 6. And then somebody told me that someone had already done that. So I decided, okay, we're going to have to have a new career choice here. And ended up thinking just, I love books. I loved writing. I loved words. And ended up headed down this path, but very young. Like my best friend and I would be like 7, and she was going to be a vet, right? And I was going to write books about the animals she cured. And while I don't write books about the animals she cured, I am a writer, and she is in fact a vet. We've stuck to that since we were 7.
The high school theater stage is a fascinating one indeed because you can find your spotlight where it might not exist in other parts of academic life, but at the same time you're disappearing into a role you're playing, which has to be great practice for any aspiring novelist. What first drew you to drama and acting as another way to immerse yourself in storytelling as you were growing up?
It was the characters. It was the idea for this hour or two, you can get a glimpse of the world through the eyes of someone who's completely different from you. And you can, if you can get out of the way, you can give that character your space on stage and give the audience a glimpse into a whole other person's world. It was that idea that the world is a different experience and looks different for every person. And that for every person, that experience is equally vivid, equally real, equally valid as your own. And there's something magic to me about that idea of letting the character have your space for a little while and letting the audience into their world. So that for me was the draw of acting, and still is. I do little bits here and there still. And I think in some ways that was the draw of writing as well, because I tend to write narrators and characters who are really, really different from me. I've got no interest in writing about anybody who's anything like me, because I do that the rest of the time anyway. It's not interesting. I'm doing it anyway, and it involves, an awful lot of figuring out who's outgrown their shoes, which is not fascinating. Do you know what I mean? But the idea of writing a world from someone else's perspective and letting the audience in or the readers in in so much depth and with so much intimacy that they feel like this is a person they know inside out. That felt like magic. So for both acting and writing, it was that character thing. That's the magic that pulled me in.
As you extended that artistic growth while studying acting at Trinity College in Dublin, and earlier, who stands out as supporters in your story among the academics or maybe theater teachers who rooted your talent on as it continued to come into fuller bloom?
From someone else's perspective and letting the audience in or the readers in so much depth and with so much intimacy that they feel like this is a person they know inside out. That felt like magic. So for both acting and writing, it was that character thing. That's the magic that pulled me in.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, in studying at Trinity College, I always ask this in the sense of they're so often unsung heroes that in the context of further helping you evolve your craft or just teaching you new methods or what have you. For you, is there anyone you kind of could be from, I don't know what they call high school if in Dublin, but in also college, or if you were in the States, how are the translation? Anyone that you sing the praises of to this day that helped you along that path?
Oh yeah, that's very, very easy. I was in high school in Rome in an international school, and I had an English teacher, Miss Nace, and she was that teacher. Like, she took no crap. She could silence a class with one raised eyebrow and going, Tana, is there a problem? And you're going, no, God, no, I wasn't talking, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't anything. And yet she had such passion and such love for her subject and for all of us. She would not accept less than her best, but she would do absolutely anything to help you get to that best. She would support you, encourage you, teach you every way there was. And for a lot of us, I know, for a lot of my class, we still talk to her and we still sing her praises. And she had a really varied curriculum with us. I mean, this is like late 80s, early 90s, and she was doing everything from Shakespeare to Virginia Woolf to Pablo Neruda to James Baldwin. This is what we were doing in school, and it was fascinating. It was a fascinating expansion of our idea of what literature was.
When you brave from there out into becoming a professional actor, it really does arm you with the ability to look at storytelling, as we like to say, in 3D, whether from writing or delivering dialogue, to plotting or backdrops, or inhabiting a character, and on and on. What are a few ways you feel, looking back, that your theater and voiceover work aided you in your noveling to come?
Two main things. One is dialogue, which is if I write a line of dialogue and I would not be happy to get up and say it on stage, something's wrong with it. Because you can write a line of dialogue, look back at it and go, oh, that's clunky, or that makes no sense for that character. That character wouldn't say that. Then you know it's wrong and it has to be redone. So that's one of the main things. If it's dialogue that you wouldn't be happy to get up and say in front of people, you probably need to work it a little bit more. And the other one is, like a lot of actors, when you're breaking down a script, you look at it in terms of the character's objective. What is the character trying to do with this line? And it might not be something obvious. Like if I say to you, shall I bring you your tea? It might not be that I'm trying to get you a cup of tea. It might be that I'm trying to annoy a third person who did something to annoy me 2 pages ago, and I'm offering you the tea instead of them so that I show them that you're my top priority right now. But there's still an objective, whether it's directed at you or at someone else. There always is to most things people do. The objective can be as simple as, to make someone feel loved. So you say, do you want your tea? Because you just want them to know you care about them. Or it can be that much more subtle, subtexty one. But there's always an objective. And I think one of the pitfalls that it's easy to fall into as a writer is to force characters into the patterns that you want them to be in. Like, I need somebody to move the plot forward in this way, so I'm going to make this character do it. Or I need somebody to show the main character's soft side, so I'm going to throw him in a girlfriend and have her go along for the ride. And the character themselves doesn't have any objective, doesn't have any reason to do this or be there. And it shows to the reader. You can see when the character is there, not because they have any reason to be, but because the writer wants them to be. So I think that's the other thing I got from theatre is I always need to be clear on what the character's objective is, why they're here doing this, what they need from it.
National Public Radio drawing attention to your first published novel and its stylistic components that would become signatures of your catalog to come. Promised that curious readers would find part whodunit and part psychological thriller here, where French's plot twists and turns will bamboozle even the most astute reader. While the New York Times was up for the challenge, that French promises 2 whodunits for the price of 1 in her harrowing first novel by linking the contemporary homicide of a 12-year-old girl from a small town near Dublin with the misadventures of 3 children who vanish while playing in the same wooded area 20 years earlier, adding that the intricate design of her storytelling is something of its own reward. Please share the truly serendipitous story with viewers, if you would, of how your real-life passion for archaeology would help unearth what will become In the Woods.
Well, that was completely accidental, but the archaeology to writing thing did come full circle for me, because when I was in theatre, unless you're like Judi Dench or somebody, the gigs do not line up perfectly, and I was never Judi Dench. So I had like a month off or something in between 2 shows, and I decided, right, this is one of the moments where I want to go back to that archaeological passion that I had as a kid. So I found a dig that needed volunteers or like low paid workers or whatever for a few weeks to just do, the grunt work. Here's a mattock, here's a wheelbarrow, go dig that up and like don't wreck anything. So I was doing that for a month in between shows, and there was a wood not far from the dig. And I was looking at it going, God, that would be a great place for kids to play. And the thing about a mystery writer's mind is I think you're always looking for the potential mystery in everything. So instead of stopping there like a normal person, I went, whoa, what if 3 kids ran in there to play and only one ever came out? And he had no memory of what had happened to the other 2. Like, what would that do to his mind? Growing up knowing that the solution to this massive mystery is somewhere in there, but he can't put his finger on it. And then what if he became a detective and a murder case drew him back to that wood? So I kind of scribbled it down on a piece of paper and forgot about it for a while, and then found the piece of paper and went, I really want to know how that story ends. And of course, nobody else was going to write it for me. And I'd never tried to write a full book. I tried to write short stories before. I'd written, bunches of short stories and like the compulsory, really terrible teenage poetry I still have somewhere. But I'd never tried to write a book. So I reckon I probably can't write a whole book, but I could probably write one scene and then another scene. And then, oh my gosh, I've got a chapter. And I found myself turning down acting work because I wanted to put all my free time into this book. And if you know actors, they do not turn down acting work, especially good acting work. And when I said no to a show that I knew was going to be really good, I went, okay, this writing thing might be serious here. So yeah, archaeology brought me back to writing yet again.
Cleverly here, we might add, as you cast the lone survivor from the 1984 murder mystery as Detective Rob Ryan, as he was first coming to life as a character in your imagination. After having played so many yourself and acted with so many, how visually did you see him and hear him speak as he began leading you organically into telling the story that followed?
God, can't talk to him. It's more the rhythms of his voice that I could hear and the kind of the inner rhythm of his thinking, the sort of nervy, edgy, highly controlled inner rhythm that he's got that's not always perfectly controlled because, this is a guy who has been cracked straight through at a formative age, and that crack's still there, but it's very well concealed. So it was more the rhythms and more like I never base characters on real people who I've known, but every now and then I do write a character for a specific actor, like that I think they would play really well. And I've got a mate who I was writing this character of Rob Ryan going, although he's nothing like the character, I think he'd play him really, really well. Now, he's long aged out of it because what's Rob Ryan, kind of 31, 32, something like that. And we've hit 50 now. So, but I do that sometimes where I'm going, I've worked with this actor. I know how good they are and I know how they work. And I find myself writing little bits going, oh, he'd play that really well.
Now, a lot of authors we've spoken to on the show talk about elaborate thought going into crafting the name of a series star. Others have talked at the same time about the muse just dropping one into their lap. How much design went into settling on Rob Ryan?
I'm not sure why he's named Rob. Ryan was because I needed it to be a very generic name, because it had to be something where he wouldn't be recognizable, but childhood identity. You know what I mean? He's using his middle name. His first name is Adam. This would have been a hugely, like a case that was all over the media when he was a child, and he doesn't want to be associated in any way with that childhood case. So he's using his middle name, but if the surname was any way distinctive, he would have been identified. So it had to be one of a handful of surnames that in Ireland, like everybody has, Murphy and Kelly and Walsh and Ryan, and just Ryan went best with Rob, which felt like the right first name for him. So he ended up, yeah.
Now, every great police procedural series always has a competitively lovable, crime-solving sidekick. And in this case, Casey Maddox walked right into readers' hearts and never left as one of their beloved favorites from the Dublin Murder Squad. With career-long fan The New York Times and their same fountain of initial coverage of the arrival of these investigators to the scene, gushing at one point that the first book thrillingly describes the professional partnership of Rob Ryan and Casey Maddox. How did you want Cassie to balance Rob out as an investigative team and still be strong and skilled enough to stand in her own spotlight as an investigator?
I wanted it to be a friendship. I wanted it to be a really good friendship. And it seemed to me that he was the kind of guy who would probably do well with a girl best friend. Like not a romantic thing, although due to the level of pressure and trauma he's under, things do get a little bit wobbly at some stage. But the kind of thing that could stay a really strong platonic partnership and friendship forever. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to go into because I don't, more now, but at the time I didn't see that very much. A portrayal of a really strong friendship between a man and a woman that just works really well and that isn't all about romance sublimated or other. It's just a really good partnership. And I thought both of them also, he consistently feels a little bit like the outsider because he is carrying this mystery inside himself and the secret about himself and the sense that he is in some ways set apart from people who haven't been through this traumatic event. So I wanted somebody else who might in some ways be sidelined a little or not feel like they belonged quite in an elite murder squad. And I know from my favorite retired detective who has talked to me about all this stuff, that there is a certain amount of misogyny alive and well within the Garda. And it can be quite hard on women, especially as they move higher up the ranks. And I thought, well, maybe just the fact that she is in fact female in this very high pressure, high octane, high testosterone squad, would give her that slight outsider perspective that would mean they'd be drawn to each other and they'd work well together. And he would feel less of an outsider around her.
The Atlantic would astutely observe at one point that everyone on the squad, each member, brought a new kind of intensity to the case at hand. Please introduce us, if you would, to David Walsh, your real-life source on the force, so to speak, that you talked about playing such an important role in helping create the accuracy and authenticity of your series. What a real murder squad talks, walks, operates, and investigates like.
I knew him from beforehand because his brother went to drama school with my husband. So it's Ireland. Listen, everybody is 2 degrees of separation from everybody else. We all know each other one way or another. And so I knew him via this. And when I started writing this, I went, I am going to have to, if not get everything right, then at least know the answers to all the questions so that if I depart from the reality, it's a deliberate choice for the sake of the story rather than just being me shoving my foot in my mouth. It should be deliberate. So I talked to him about things, and he was wonderful because not only has he answered, man, the strangest questions over the years, but he tells me stuff I didn't even ask about. He will sit down, buy him a cup of coffee, and he'll just tell me stories. He files off the serial numbers, you know what I mean? He's not telling me names, dates, places, but he's telling me the stories. And that's what you need as a writer, because sometimes you don't know the right questions to ask. I don't know how to ask, but what does it feel like in a moment like this? What's the atmosphere after 18 hours of a long day on a hyper? But he'll just tell me the stories, and gradually I am able to absorb a little bit of the atmosphere, a little bit of how the tensions play out. And that's what you want. So I'm grateful not only for the answers, but for the time when he's not answering, he's just talking.
Salon is admired from the start of your career, the way that you always do something fresh with every novel. Each one as powerful as the last, but in a very different manner. Perhaps she has superpowers of her own. Whatever the source of her gift, it's only growing more miraculous with every book. Speaking of sequel to likeness here, one difference that began to emerge as a trend in each of the new Dublin Murder Squad Case to Follow was your focus on telling the story from perspectives of different detectives book in and out. Why did it feel right to tell this one from that of Cassie Maddox, and while she's undercover as Lexi Madison, no less?
It kind of came from me. I'd finished In the Woods. I had it sent out and I started going, well, if I'm really lucky and somebody publishes this, they might want another one. I should probably be thinking about that. And I know, like, the standard way to go about a series is to stick with the one detective. And if you're doing that, you mostly follow them through all the sort of more minor ups and downs of life. Like if you take P.D. James's Dalgleish series, something like that, she's following Dalgleish through all just the progressions of a normal life. And while I love reading those series, I just love watching the character change and grow and move through the events of a normal lifetime. It's not what I'm interested in writing. I like writing characters at big turning points where they encounter the case that is going to break that borderline between professional and personal life, and that whatever they decide, it's going to define their lives moving forward, for better or for worse, depending on how it all plays out. And you can't really do that with the same character in multiple books, because if you keep giving this poor guy massive, big, life-changing turning points, he's got to be in a straitjacket by book 3. You can't do this to the poor guy. So I thought, well, what could I do? And I had this idea of what would happen if a detective showed up at the scene of a murder and found that the victim looked exactly like them. Now, at the time, I thought I had come up with that myself, and I had only started the likeness when I found the Tess Gerritsen book where she had done that first and went, no, I messed it all up. But it turned out fine because we were doing different things. You know, it always does. There are no new ideas. You're always doing it your own way, and it'll always be different. But I was thinking about that idea of the detective finding their double at a murder scene. And I thought, actually, that would go quite well with Cassie, because she has this slightly odd relationship with identity in her past. She's half French. Her parents died when she was very young. She was brought up by an aunt and uncle. She's not rooted within her own life in the way that many people are. So I thought this idea, sort of with strange identity stuff, especially as she's been an undercover detective, she's taken on another identity previously. this would kind of thematically be a really good match for her. I wonder where that would go. So I ended up throwing her in.
As the series' popularity spread from there like wildfire around the world, the Globe and Mail up north from here in Canada admired the fact that at the heart of every Tana French novel lies a central mystery that casts a shadow upon its protagonist. This theme of the unknowability of the self is used to terrific effect in her first and brilliant third novel as she returns to this idea, where an event from the past, for which the protagonist does not have all the facts, still becomes the fulcrum upon which his entire life turns. Frank Mackey, formerly a minor character in the likeness, is a classic rumple detective of noirish thrillers, divorce, troubles, an escapee from a brutal childhood, a working class part of Dublin. Why was it time for Frank to head back home here to investigate the discovery of an old suitcase containing clues like shreds of clothes, 2 long expired ferry tickets to London, and his long lost love Rosie Daly's birth certificate? A plot we understand was actually first sparked in part by a dumpster you passed driving home one day by a house being gutted, that set your fingers ablaze from there, typing away on what would become a faithful place.
Well, I love Dublin. I've lived here for nearly 34 years now, right? And that's right, isn't it? God, yeah. And I love the place. But I really understand that the way my husband loves it is completely different. He's Dublin through and through for generations back, like probably going back to the Vikings. And he's from that neighborhood in Dublin where the original Viking settlements were. And it's an interesting neighborhood. It's called the Liberties because back in the day, hundreds of years ago, it was in fact outside the main walls. It had its own rules. It kept its own, it was able to set its own rules and follow its own way. And it was, up until very recently, the kind of neighborhood where everyone was linked for generations back. Now there's been a lot of kind of gentrification, people moving in, people not able to stay there, people moving out. So it's a lot more mixed up than it was then. But up until our generation, these were people whose families were tied together for centuries. And your relationship with everybody in the neighborhood was very much bounded from the moment you were born by old stories and old relationships. You know, you're not on good terms with that family because back in 1902, somebody's granny ran off with your granddad's brother who was married to, oh, okay, so you're allies with them. And it's all incredibly intricate. And the people you call your cousin are mostly not related to you by blood, but, you know, you call them your cousin because it's simpler than explaining the real tie, which will take 25 minutes. It's just a very enmeshed and interconnected neighborhood. And I found that fascinating. Coming from where I do, which is we were moving around all the time, I never had time to get more enmeshed than a few years here or there, let alone having relationships that went back generations. So to me, the idea of this place was absolutely fascinating, very, you know, almost exotic and very interesting. And I had been thinking about that and how you would set a book within that kind of intricate interconnection. And I was walking home one day and there was an old Georgian house that was being cleared out and they had a skip, like a dumpster, I think is probably the American term for it, outside. And on top of all the rubbish and like bits of brick and stuff that had been thrown into this skip, there was an old battered blue suitcase. I wonder how that got there. I wonder what's in it. I wonder how long it's been in that house. And like I said earlier, a mystery writer is always looking for the potential mystery in everything. How could that be mysterious? How could that have a complicated story behind it? How could it set in motion a train of events that would change everything between a group of people? So I started thinking about Frank, who had been a supporting character in the likeness. He's a detective, he's an undercover detective, he's got a certain level of ruthlessness, he's got a very specific moral sense where there are only certain things that he actually gives a damn about in moral terms, and they're very clearly delineated and very limited. I started thinking, where does he come from? Does he come from a neighborhood like that? What's his relationship with it now? And what if he left because he had set up a date to run away with his girlfriend and then she ditched him, she dumped him, she never showed up? What if that was her suitcase and she had never gone anywhere at all? So it kind of spiraled from there.
Tapping into the psychological side of the ride, you take readers on Thriller In and Out. Here with Broken Harbor is a brilliant examination of that part of your process in action. The Wall Street Journal acknowledged what many felt by then, that you'd come to be regarded as one of the most distinct and exciting new voices in crime writing, constructing your plots in a dreamlike fashion that seems at odds with the genre's fixed narrative conventions, and undercuts expectations at every turn. The victims begin to look less like victims, the case starts to unravel, and the lead detective makes compromises that could ruin him. Speaking of fan favorite Mick Scorcher Kennedy, generally considered among the best in the Dublin murder squad, when you're setting all of this up for Mike to deal with, a character's backstory for many we talk to all of a sudden becomes very important. And if it was a supporting cast character stepping into the lead, they might not have one as thoroughly fleshed out as, say, Rob Ryan's. Could you illustrate for viewers a bit about how mapped out your character sketching process is as you're writing?
As an example.
I never have a plan. I really never have a plan. I wing it. I'm figuring it out as I go along. And that holds also for character backstory. Because in Faithful Place, Scorcher exists only through the lens of Frank. And through Frank's perspective, Scorcher is this pompous, rule-bound, up-himself little git who exists purely to get in your way with his triplicate paperwork. But that's because that's what Frank needs to see at that moment. His life has just been overturned. He's found out that his first love, rather than ditching him, actually ended up murdered. He needs somewhere to take out the sheer fury and chaos, and he doesn't know where to direct that, so it all gets directed onto poor Scorcher, who has shown up to try and solve this case. And Frank, wasn't crazy about anyway, but he's seen in Faithful Place through that lens. And when I started working on Broken Harbour and had the premise of this family found dead in this ghost estate, I realized that this would have to be one of those families who had fallen for the great lie of the Celtic tiger over here, the economic boom, which was that if you do everything the way you're supposed to, you follow the rules, you buy a house off plans in some estate that doesn't even exist yet for a astronomical price, then in 5 years, the house will be worth 10 times what you paid for it, and you can sell it and get rich, and everything will be wonderful forever. Of course, none of that worked out. The boom turned into a crash, and the people who had followed all those rules found themselves living in houses that were deeply in negative equity, on half-built estates with no infrastructure, no street lighting, no house next door half the time. And I thought a lot about this because it was my generation who was the worst casualties of this. And the blow it would strike, not just financially, which is big enough, but psychologically. If you're the kind of person who has really believed, that if you do what is presented as the right thing to do in life, then you'll be okay. And then you find out that that was not true and that you are not okay. What would that do to you psychologically? So when I realized that was what I was working with in Broken Harbour, it became obvious that Scorcher, who does follow the rules at every turn, no matter what, he had to be the narrator for this. And I kind of didn't want him to be, because people who follow every rule rigidly, no matter what, are definitely not my kind of people. I know. These are not my people. I don't operate like that, and I'm not crazy about people who do. But here I was with this guy who had to be my narrator, and I was thinking, like I said earlier, you're showing your reader the world through this person's eyes. So you owe it to your character to have them be right. The narrator is always right. Nobody ever thinks they're being stupid or annoying or evil or any of that. So if Scorcher was going to be my narrator, I had to believe that he had excellent reasons for being this way. Really strong, powerful, valid reasons for believing that you have got to follow the rules, because otherwise things are going to break down in chaos. You can't trust your own instincts. You can't trust what you feel is the right thing to do in this moment. You just stick to the rule. So that's when I started going into his backstory and going, what would make someone this way? What would make someone a good guy, a guy who's trying to do things right, believe that this is the one way to do it? And that's how kind of Scorcher's backstory started to evolve.
You alternate the story's points of view in The Secret Place in a very entertaining way back and forth between Scorcher and the teenage students at St. Kilda's all-girls boarding school in Dublin. That must have provided a whole party of people to play with as an actress, to act out all their attitudes. And how much fun did you have traveling back to that age on the page with Detective Antoinette Conway and partner Stephen Moran as the chosen team to close this case?
Oh man, that was a lot of fun, because teenagers, just their whole sense of reality is different. It's a much more fluid thing. It's not fixed and solid the way it is, at least to some extent, for us grown-ups. For them, anything could happen at any moment. They haven't got a solid sense of the way the world does and doesn't work. They're testing it. They're trying stuff out. They're figuring out who they are, how they interact with the world, how they interact with each other. Everything is on the table. There are no limits. And the energy level. Oh my God, if I had the level of energy of a teenager.
Taking this case as an example, within the murder mystery matrix, when do you reach a point when you know who done it, so to speak? Does that tend to come early or later on in the story?
It's pretty late on, mostly. I blame this on the acting background because, again, I'm starting with character. The plot comes out of the characters more than the other way around. So, in order for me to figure out what's going to happen in this book, I have to write the characters for a while. I have to figure out how they relate to each other, who they are, what their motivations are, before I can figure out who would have done what to whom for what reason. So usually, sometimes I don't even know who's going to get killed until I'm a little way into the book. And I definitely don't know who did the killing. Like sometimes I'll be about 2/3 of the way through and go, oh my God, it was so and so. And then I have to go back and rewrite chunks of the book in order to seed that properly. Because you can't just drop it in out of nowhere. There have to be slight indications. The character's arc has to add up correctly towards that. And sometimes I have to go back and polish and reshape and just like refocus things around that fact that you're going to find out who done it and it's going to be this person at a certain point. And in a lot of ways, I envy those writers who have it all planned out when they start. I know some of them, they've got a full chapter by chapter outline before they ever start writing. And that's great because they know there's a book there. They know that all the loose ends are going to tie up. There is a solution. It's all going to come together. And I don't know that. I am just diving into the pool and hoping I don't hit my head on the bottom. And so far, touch wood, there's turned out to be an ending, but you never know. But what I hope the upside of it is that maybe an element of that surprise that I feel when I go, oh my gosh, it was so and so. I'm hoping a little bit of that transfers over to the readers.
As this series penetrated popularity's mainstream and continued to stay there in a bigger and bigger way over the Dublin Murder Squad's history-making run, your characters and style of storytelling grabbed readers from every corner of the universe. Consider Harper Bazaar's riveted review of The Trespasser, calling it a fierce examination of the chasm between how women choose to present themselves before the world and the more complicated truth underneath, and not to mention as a total page-turner. And one where the Los Angeles Times echoed when most felt that it's impossible to get tired of Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad. What in your heart made you feel like it was time to make this crime the last one they'd be investigating, which notably also extended Conway and Moran's run as leads on the final case?
It was Conway, Antoinette Conway, more than Moran. Now, I like the relationship between the two of them, so I wanted to keep the pair of them. But she's the narrator because, again, I had started to think about that idea of the murder squad turning on its own, like attacking someone within. What would happen if that energy, that intensity that you get within a high level squad like that turned rogue and turned bad and turned inwards? And she seemed like somebody who, for multiple reasons, might well be on the receiving end of that. She's biracial, she's female, and she's working class. Urban, when in a place where a lot of the guards are from rural backgrounds, not everybody, but being from this very urban working class environment would probably make her not necessarily the typical person in an elite squad. But also she's highly on the defensive for natural enough reasons. But I thought that might amplify any tensions and might make her less willing to just bend to any bullying or harassment that came her way, might make her more intensely assertive and aggressive and might heighten that tension until it got a chance to play out fully rather than just dissipating. So I thought she'd just be an interesting one to play with. What would happen if she was on the receiving end of that freight train aggression that I'd felt coming off that detective? How would she respond? How would she fight back? She would fight back. And where would that end? It just felt like, in some ways, a natural point to leave the murder squad's thing behind. I had kind of been thinking about it because I was getting uncomfortable with the detective's perspective. Because a lot of mysteries, the vast majority of mysteries, up until recently anyway, have come from the detective's perspective. And it's a fascinating one because the person who unravels the mysteries is fascinating. The process of unraveling the mystery is fascinating. But I just felt like within any murder investigation, for the detective, the process is a source of power, of control, of reimposing order on the disruption that murder has caused. But there are a lot of other viewpoints within this investigation as well. There are witnesses, there are suspects, there's the perpetrators, there's the victims. And for them, this investigation is not a locus of control and of order. This is something that comes barreling into their lives, turns them upside down, and quite possibly does permanent damage to them. And I felt like those other perspectives deserved a voice and some space as much as the detectives did. And I wanted a chance to look at things from those other perspectives. And so in Witch Elm, the narrator, Toby, he's all of those. Like at various points in the book, he is the victim and the witness and the suspect and the perpetrator. And he does try to be the detective briefly, but it really does not go well for him.
We understand your real-life law enforcement consultant on the book series, David Walsh, actually helped inspire the plot for this final case in the series?
He kind of set off the inspiration for the Trespasser, actually. It's all his fault, because I'd rung him up to ask something about some other book. And I said, well, how would you interview a suspect under these conditions? And he went, well, I'd go. And he started doing it over the phone, right? Just interrogating me the way he would this suspect. And this is a lovely guy. He's really laid back. He's really chatty. He's a little bit goofy. He's a lot of fun. And he switched like that from this chatty, goofy guy to somebody coming at me like a freight train. Like I was on the phone and I was leaning back in my seat with the shock of it, realizing that all of the people who do this have this other mode at their fingertips where they can just switch and be coming at you. And I wasn't even suspected of anything. And I felt like I was going, okay, yeah, I know whatever he wanted his information. He was going to get it, whatever it took. And it was quite scary. And that was the impetus for the Trespasser, because I started going, well, what if you found that force directed at you when you were, in fact, supposed to be the detective? You were supposed to be in a place where you were safe at home and in power, and yet you felt that turned on you. And that's where the entire book came out of, so I owe him a lot.
The New Yorker rightly recognized that by the point you decided in 2018 to transition out of the Dublin Murder Squad series and into the territory of your first standalone novel, that French had become known as the queen of Irish crime fiction, her latest book departing from the line of police procedurals, where the New Republic argued once the pages started turning that the author's at the cutting edge of crime fiction, and the Witch Elm pushes its boundaries further. It's also a thrilling, absorbing mystery, sprinkled liberally with red herrings and culminating in a profoundly satisfying if totally unforeseeable ending. Investigation of the police, and instead from those of the suspects, witnesses, perpetrator, and victims. And how real does playing each of those roles out fully in your head as your writing feel?
It's a weird experience, because for that one in particular, right, I don't know anyone with an acquired brain injury. And I read the entire internet on this because I realized fairly early on that it was another of these situations where asking questions of people with acquired brain injuries wasn't going to be enough, because then I'm going to be asking them what I want to know. And that might not be the right questions. I needed to just listen to what these people who had this experience wanted to tell others.
You spotlighted a great true life story of your brother forwarding you an email link to a story about a real life skull found in a tree, and your desire to write about empathy as the two threads that really tie this story together. Please talk about what drew you to both as you wove them together so effectively here.
It was kind of a combination of two things. One was my brother sent me a link to the story of Bella in the Witch Elm, which is the skull and eventually the full skeleton of a woman who was found by a bunch of boys out playing in the woods in England in 1943. And nobody knows who she was to this day. And he sent me a link to this going, this sounds like a Tana French novel. And yeah, he turned out to be right. I should probably buy him a couple of pints. But also at the same time, I've been thinking a lot about luck and the way it shapes us, and the way, like, if we've been lucky on too many fronts in life, I think it can stunt the growth of empathy, because you start feeling like everybody experiences the world the way you do. And that's actually not the truth. Somebody who has not been lucky in life is not living in the same world. Is somebody, on the most basic level, somebody who's been born into a millionaire family is not living in the same world as somebody whose family is absolutely stony broke poor. It's not, their experience of everything, every little day-to-day thing is different. And I think it can be quite harmful to empathy if you grow up lucky on too many fronts, because you start thinking, what's the saying, born on third base and thought he hit a triple, isn't that the American saying? You start thinking that luck is somehow innate to you and something you earned, something something you've created rather than something that just happened to happen to you. So I was thinking about a main character who'd rolled sixes on everything, who has the easier side of the coin in every way. And there are very few of them. Most of us may have the easier side of the coin in a few ways, but the harder side in other ways. So we don't grow up with that exclusive assumption of luck. Like maybe somebody is, male and he's white, which are the easier sides of the coin, but he's also grown up in a pretty working class family, and he's also, maybe he's neurodiverse, so he hasn't flipped the easy side of the coin on that. So he's aware that people have luck. They have easy bits and difficult bits to their experience of life. But what about somebody who he's white, he's male, he's straight, he's cis, he's intelligent enough, he's good looking enough, he's mentally and physically healthy, which I think is a very easy thing for those of us who are to take for granted and never think about how much it influences our day-to-day experience. He's from a loving, supportive family, they're well off. And then what happens if in some way that luck gets smashed one day? And in his case, it's because burglars break into his house and he ends up with an acquired brain injury that affects him both physically and mentally. He's no longer totally physically and mentally healthy. He's no longer able to experience the world every day on the easiest setting. And then a skull shows up in a tree in the family home, and he has to confront the possibility that not only is he no longer the person he thought he was, but maybe his past was never what he thought it was either, and his reality starts breaking down. So it was the two things, the skull in the tree and the idea of luck.
In the tradition of the American Western movie where there's always a cowboy riding into the story in the beginning and off into the sunset at the end, retired Chicago detective Cal Hooper has done both in a manner of speaking. Moving into what NPR's Fresh Air called an eerie and nuanced, moving into the small Ireland village of Ardnakelty, where while he's making adjustments in his life on the page, you as his creator were stylistically too. For instance, in opting to tell the story from the third person, and to sweep readers away into Western Ireland. Why did interrupting Cal's retirement with another new murder to solve excite you anew as you were writing The Searcher?
Things are actually really related in a weird way. The Western thing was because I had never read any Westerns. For some reason, I just never thought it would be something that I'd get into. And then Pat Anderson, who writes for the Washington Post, went, "You have got to read Lonesome Dove." And I trust his taste. I've read his reviews. I trust this guy on books. And so I picked up Lonesome Dove, and man, what a book. What a book and a half. And then I picked up True Grit from there on, and on a more modern note, The Sisters Brothers, and went, these are great books. And they explore fascinating territory. And not just that, but a lot of these tropes would do really well transposed onto a West of Ireland setting, because there are things in common. There's this harsh terrain that is demanding a huge mental and physical toughness on anybody who wants to make a living out of it. And there's this sense of great beauty, harsh beauty, but great beauty as well, and of the landscape being intricately intertwined with people's day-to-day lives. But there's also this sense of you've got a place that is so far removed from the centers of power, both geographically and culturally, that the people living there have a feeling like, the power mongers don't really care about us. They don't understand our lives. They don't care about our lives. If we want a functioning society, we're going to have to set our own rules and enforce them ourselves. And that is a line that runs through a lot of Irish drama, oddly. You've got like great classics like The Field and The Playboy of the Western World, where it is that. It's this like small rural community that's so distant from the main centers of power that it just has its own society set up here and its own rules that are very stringently enforced. And then a stranger comes into town and everything changes around him. He becomes a catalyst. So I started thinking about that. The stranger blowing into town, there was so many Westerns happen. And he's probably got a past. He comes into the saloon and, maybe he's got secrets, maybe he doesn't. But either way, he's going to be a catalyst. Things are going to change around him. He might shoot the evil sheriff and set the town to rights, or he might shoot the good sheriff and everything's going to come tumbling down, but he's going to change things. And I thought about setting that in a West of Ireland setting. And that, in a way, was why it turned out to be third person, because I'd just come off writing Witch Hunt, which is a very introspective book. Like, the main locus of the action is inside the narrator's head, quite literally in some ways. And it's a lot about his thoughts and his thought process and how he analyzes those and tries to figure out what his mind is really deep down, who he is, what he is. And while I really enjoyed writing that, by the last 2 weeks, I was kind of going, dude, pull it together, get a job, and take your head out of your belly button. And so I wanted to write somebody who was very action-based. And that fit in really well, I think, with Westerns. Because in Westerns, a lot of the focus is not on who thinks what or who feels how. It's on who does what. It's on the actions. And so Cal is a character who feels like what you think isn't that important, whether you think the right thing. It's what you do. It's action. And that means if you set a book in first person, right, you're implying that what's inside the character's head is important, that you as the reader need to be inside this person, in their mind, in order to get the important part of the book. But I felt like a character like Cal would be going, no, what's in my head is not important. What I do is what matters. And so it would have seemed inappropriate in a weird way to set it in first person. It needed to be third person because the format of the book needed to be shaped by who the character is. And if you are at Cal's shoulder the whole time, because it is close third person, if you're at his shoulder, seeing glimpses into his head, but mainly what he does and says, that's where you belong for this book. It's a book about actions.
Sounds very exciting. As you were out riding across this new Wild West on the page, so to speak, once we arrive at the murder, you put your expected expertise on display once again in solving that crime and pulling all the colorful locals of this small village into the mix, where any of them could actually be the murderer, and everyone, of course, thinks they're a detective who knows who done it.
Oh, all of that. For one thing, I like the idea of the detective who's been stripped of everything detective-y. And Cal has deliberately tried to leave behind being a detective. He does not have the faith in the job or in himself as a detective that he used to have. The line in the book is he's come to the realization that one of them, him or the job or both, can't be trusted. So his plan here was to leave it behind, and yet suddenly being a detective is demanded of him. But he has none of the artillery. He can't ring up the tech department and go, listen, can you dump this suspect's phone and find out where he was and who he's been talking to? He can't pull somebody in and interrogate them. He doesn't have a badge. He doesn't have a gun. He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have, forensics departments at his disposal. He has nothing but whatever is left within himself. So the question becomes, is being a detective to some extent, has it become ingrained in him, whether he likes it or not? And to what extent is he willing to accept that and use it when it's needed? And to what extent was it just trappings that he could take off when he decided to? So that was a lot of fun to play with. What's a detective when he's not a detective anymore? But I also loved the chance to play with the Irish way of not saying things, because the Irish are so good at that, man. I think to an extent it might be to do with being a post-colonial society. After centuries of what was at times extremely oppressive and repressive British rule, where people had to be quite good at not saying anything, because anything you said could get you in very, very deep trouble. So the Irish have a great skill for not saying the thing. And for Cal, this is something that is strange and unintelligible and exasperating, and he has to figure out what the hell people are telling him a lot, because they talk round the thing in slowly decreasing concentric circles until he gets the message. But he's consistently decoding. He's in a place that has all its own codes that it speaks in, and he has to be consistently decoding all these codes. And that was fun to write, that little culture gap going on.
Esquire magazine broke the news at the outset of The Hunter that 2 years have passed since the events of The Searcher, and now retired Chicago PD detective Cal Hooper has eased into small-town West Ireland life, taking comfort in his growing relationship with local widow Lena Dunn and his mentoring of Trey Reddy, now 15 and coming into her own. Then Trey's father, Johnny Reddy, returns to summer-sweltering Ardnakelty after years away in London, bringing with him a moneyed stranger and talk of a gold rush. of the town with the prospect of unexpected riches, leads to murder is inevitable. But it's the way French unspools that inevitability, languidly, until it's almost too late. What led you to want to once again become a member of the village you created here, as the new kid in town arrives and to make Time magazine promise that the author writes at a measured pace, easing readers into Cal's quiet life before the thrills unravel?
I loved writing about Ardnakelty, about this small village where it's not like a city setting. It's not like, if you live in the city, right, you can detach yourself from the people around you. You can just not bother anybody, not like play your music loud or let your dog bark, and you're detached. There's no way to detach in a small rural community. You're very tight knit. Everything you do has an impact. And I thought that was fascinating. And I thought a place like that is going to have more secrets and more stories. I kept thinking there were also more Western tropes that I could play with that would overlay really well on this. So when it came to The Hunter, I'd been thinking about, you know, the Western trope of there's gold and then there are hills. Now that doesn't seem like a perfect fit for Ireland, but weirdly enough, there actually have been huge numbers of ancient gold artifacts found in Ireland. And there have been little mini gold rushes over the centuries. And even up until today, you still get people, companies forming to search for gold in the Irish mountains. So I thought, wait a minute, the gold rush trope from Westerns would actually map quite well onto the west of Ireland. And I'd also been thinking about that trope about, you know, when the adventurer comes home, the ne'er-do-well who's been away, the rascal, and he comes home and he's brought trouble home with him. And I thought, well, Trey's absent father, Johnny, what if he came home and he brought with him an English millionaire and a plan to find gold in the mountains and make the whole townland rich? And he wanted Trey on side for that plan. What would that do to the fragile relationship that Cal and Trey and Lena have been building up over the last couple of years if this sudden bombshell, this grenade gets detonated in the middle of that relationship and suddenly Trey is pulled different ways? So that's, yeah, in The Hunter, that's what happens. They have this relationship built up, and then Trey's dad comes home. He's got plans, he's got a gold rush, and he's brought trouble.
Could you use the experience of being in Cal Hooper's head to give us a sense of what that view looks and feels like as you're interacting with those locals and loved ones as well, whether talking about Lena or Trey or others who populate his daily life?
What I like about returning to him was the surprises. I like the fact that characters can come up with surprises for you, that when you're writing someone and you suddenly realize, oh wait, they have this angle to their character that I hadn't realized before, or they would do this thing that I hadn't thought about. And I liked that when I found Cal trying to cope with a kid getting older and being a bit more of a teenager, which Trey is in The Hunter. And Cal is trying to cope with the fact that this is no longer a little kid who sees things in a single-minded way. This is someone who has complicated motives and objectives of her own. Trey is now somebody who wants revenge and yet who needs to balance that against her relationship with him, her relationship with Lena. How does she prioritize these? What is she willing to sacrifice if the two things come into conflict? And he's having to keep up the way every parent of teenagers does. You have to keep up as they turn from little kids into teens who need a whole different kind of response. And I really enjoyed writing Cal finding it within him to take that leap and make that response, not always easily and sometimes screwing up along the way, which everybody does, but I enjoyed finding new facets in him.
What are the odds of fans seeing a reunion with Cal and Co. anytime soon on the page here?
I was not planning this, but yeah, I thought I was done after The Hunter. And then I went, hang on a second. There's an arc going on with these Ardnakelty books, where the first one is about an outsider, like defining his relationship with this town. And the second one, it's not about Cal himself, it's about three people, Cal and Lena and Trey, all of whom occupy a kind of weird liminal zone where they're not quite outsiders in this place, but they're not quite insiders either. I mean, Cal is now established and accepted, but he's still an American blow-in. And Lena has spent decades deliberately distancing herself from this place because she finds it much too invasive. And Trey, while she's born and brought up in Ardnakelty, she's from that family that every small town has, where the town kind of feels like they're a lot more hassle than they're worth, and it'd be great if they'd move somewhere else. So all of them are on the periphery in this way. So I've got one book about outsiderhood, one book about the periphery, and it kind of felt like it would make sense to have one that finishes off with the experience of being an insider and what that means, what the resonances and the demands and the secrets are of insiderhood. So somehow or other, I seem to have wound up writing a third book about art and galaxy. I did not plan this. I think I'm at the stage where it's not all going to go down in flames and I'm going to have to go, actually, no, I'm writing a book about something completely else. But I think, touch wood, my God.
Now, you've quipped about that before, reaching a certain point in a book's writing where your mind tries to steal your attention away to anything else but the book. Does that happen every time or only with certain stories?
It wasn't with this one, didn't really happen with the last couple, but it's actually very useful because I'm pretty easily distracted as a person, right? What happens a lot of the time is I'm kind of 2/3 of the way through the book and my brain goes, bored of this now, do you know what would be a load of fun? I should do anything else. I should maybe, oh God, that wall needs painting and the cat needs brushing and maybe I should clean out the oven. Oh God, the attic could do with clearing. And luckily for me, one of the things that my brain tends to do during that period is go, oh, you know what you should write about is this totally different thing. That'd be way better. That'd be much more interesting. Let's go write about that instead. And of course, I don't at that moment, but it means that I have something that I'm ready to come back to once I finish this book. And luckily, you get to the point where between the fact that I've got a certain amount of practice and I'm pretty stubborn and I have a mortgage, I do always finish the book that I was writing when my brain decided to take off on a tangent. But it's nice to have this other thing just simmering away in the back of your head, waiting for you to have time to come back to it.
That sounds like a good bonus, yes. So too are those moments when we can ask a little advice along the lines of what you say to those who come up in book signing lines with questions on how to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, this is a really hard one because you want to download everything you know about writing into their little USB stick and go, here you go. But the thing is that I don't know, I am winging it a lot of the time. I'm only starting at this point to feel like I know what I'm doing. I remember reading, I don't know who it was who said that you need to write 1,000,000 words before you actually know what you're doing. And I'm probably coming up on that at this stage, given the length of book I write, but I'm only just starting to feel like I have a clue what I'm doing in this career. So the main thing I tend to tell people is read a lot, read everything you can, because that's how you find out what works and what doesn't. That's how you tune your ear in to go, hang on a second, I can tell that this is a good sentence and this sentence clunks like a bus on square wheels. And if I can tell that, if I read enough to be able to have that sense instinctively, then I'm more likely to be able to write the good sentence rather than the clunky one. And I'm more likely to be able to see, okay, that plot moves really smoothly, but that one doesn't. That one drags or sags. Okay, how did that happen? The more you read anything, everything, all genres, the more you hone your instincts. It's practice. And also, the other thing is, the amazing thing about writing, the thing I found incredibly liberating when I switched over from acting, is how much you can afford to get it wrong. It's not like theater, where every night this audience is only going to see it once. You have to get it right. This is the only moment you'll have to offer them this. When you're writing, I can write a paragraph 50 times and 49 of them can be completely awful. You only have to get it right once. Until it goes to press, it's all the equivalent of rehearsal. You can do it over and over and over. So don't be afraid of that. Edit yourself, edit yourself, edit yourself over and over, because it's an amazing thing that you have so many chances to get this right.
It's remarkable. Last two things you've talked from the point of view of you stick to mystery. It demands utility. It demands that every scene have a use and a purpose. From an advice standpoint, I'd be remiss not to ask you why you feel that way. That's a really good piece of advice, I suppose, too.
I don't feel like it necessarily always has to have a purpose in plot terms. It doesn't necessarily have to move the plot forward in some way, but it has to move something forward. Mystery is a genre with a very sort of purposeful arc, which is A kills B and C finds out who did it. Now, of course, that arc can be twisted. It can be bent out of shape. It can be tied in knots and turned inside out if you want. But overall, mystery is a genre with a trajectory keeps moving forward. So your scene might move the plot forward in some way, or it might move a character forward in some way, or a relationship forward in some way, but everything needs to be moving forward all the time. Again, doesn't necessarily have to be, and then this blew up, or, and then I did the forensics on that, but you've got to be moving the whole time. And I found that useful because I've got a tendency as a writer to go off on, oh, cool, I really like the relationship between these two characters. I think I'll just write that for 10,000 words. And mystery is one of the things that helps me keep things directed and focused and not go off on 10,000 word tangents that are fun to write, but not really necessary.
Now, I was 25 when I happened into my first book deal, and almost that many years later, it never gets old holding a new book in hand after writers like you and our wonderful publishers put into creating these books and then getting them out into readers' hands. Does that experience ever feel normal for you, say with a new translation cover, or does it feel new every time?
I am not blasé. I am definitely not blasé about it. Occasionally, it's funny, I get moments where I sort of not even take it for granted, but feel comfortable and at ease. And yeah, this is great. I've got this going. And then some little thing will happen, like somebody will send me a cover rough that's absolutely gorgeous for the new book. And I suddenly go, oh my God, it's real. That's going to be an actual book cover of an actual book I wrote. And it just gets me all over again. And it is amazing. It is, I feel really lucky. I love this.
Finally, before we go, we would get hate mail if we did not ask if there was even the smallest chance of the Dublin murder squad showing back up on the page one day to solve a new case.
I never say never because I like those characters. Writing those characters in that murder squad was fun. So I think one of the reasons I stepped away was I was a little too comfortable writing police procedurals. I was starting to get a vague sense that I kind of knew how to do this. And I've learned that as a writer, I'm only happy when I'm outside my comfort zone, when I've bitten off just a little more than I can chew, and I'm not quite sure I can pull this off. I like that feeling. I don't ever want to fall into the trap where I feel like I'm writing the same book over and over. And I think when you write genre in particular, when you are writing within a framework, it's dangerously easy to fall into that. So I moved away. That was another of the reasons I moved away from the procedural thing. So I don't know, but if an idea hit me 2/3 of the way through a totally different book for the murder squad, yeah, I'd definitely go back to it.
Tana, it has been both educational and inspiring talking today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.